All right. Um, all right, team. So we're going live. Everybody, welcome back. We're doing another live stream today. My name is Matt Unthank. I have Jordan Osagira and Ryan Croton on the call as well. And we're going to be talking about the least sexy thing when it comes to training, and that is injury prevention. I know for me as a young athlete, if you was like, hey, we're going to be doing this so you can keep your body healthy or you can not get hurt, I would have immediately tuned you out and just kind of went on with my program because that's what you told me to do, not necessarily because I had any interest in preventing injuries. But it is something that I think we need to hold to a higher regard when it comes to a training program. We're going to talk about the reasons why, but then also some of the reasons why it is not sexy as part of a training program, and we'll get into that as well. But I'll first start out with just the semantics of it, of the topic or the term injury prevention. And a lot of nerds are going to immediately say, well, you can't prevent injuries. And guys, we understand that. There's no way you're going to prevent 100% of the injuries. And really, you're talking about semantics at this point. But just like fire prevention is a term, okay, there's obviously things that are going to be outside of our control that happen. There are things that we can do to mitigate risks as part of our training program for getting hurt when we get into competition or getting hurt as part of a higher intensity part of our training. So I really want to focus on that today. When we say injury prevention, we're not talking about every player is going to be bulletproof. There's no chance of anything ever bad happening. We understand that. But we also understand that there are ways that we can mitigate risk through our training that help us stay healthy for the long term. So, guys, why don't you kick it off? I know you've ran into some stories recently on people who maybe have disregarded this whole thing altogether and wound up in a bad place.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, you can. Oh, well, we'll go with mine first because it's less drastic than yours. So we'll go from like minimum to maximum as it goes. But I had a kid who came out over here in the Salt Lake area, and he wanted to get an eval. So I did it in person. We tested his arm strength, showed him everything that was going on there. Hard thrower, a young player, hard thrower. He'll be in high school next year or the year after, I believe. So just to kind of give some context of the age range. Now he had a really good arm score, but his strength velocity ratio was really bad. And the way I always tell guys is your arm score is kind of your short term evaluator. You can get away with a lot in the short term with a good arm score, but SVR is kind of your down the road look. So this was in roughly November, right around Thanksgiving. And now we're getting into, today's May 23rd. And just a couple days ago, I had this player's parent reach out and they went, hey, my kid's got a really sore arm and now he can't throw. So again, the ounce of prevention, right? That's the difference maker in this whole thing. Is the dad originally said, we don't need this. My kid's got no arm problems. It's called arm care. We don't care about the health aspect of it until it's too late. So now he's got arm care. He's using the system for about a week and a half now, already starting to see some benefits in there. But it's important to understand where you're starting. And it's just like anything. If you do zero maintenance on your car just because the check engine light's not on, you're probably going to have a problem long term. And this is all about making sure you're not only preventing those injuries from happening, but you're building on to maximize performance as well. So arm care and performance, health, performance, they have to go hand in hand. So that's my initial, fair warning story. Ryan, yours is much worse. So I want you to jump on that one next.
Yeah. So one of a friend of one of my clients, the father, reached out to me and is kind of really interested in arm care, wondering more about it. And I'm walking him through, what would a comprehensive training package be, having your own dynamometer, your training band set, and the kids are 13 and 10. And he's kind of, a little bit on the fence, I think, for the 10-year-old, thinking, he might be a little young. Didn't pull the trigger. And then about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, he emails me and says, Ryan, I should have made the purchase for this device, when we first talked. He said, my youngest son, the 10-year-old, is he's had to go to an orthopedic specialist for pediatrics, and they're going to have to do an MRI on him because they think that he's got an aggressive case of little leaguer's elbow, and they because of, I guess, the region and what the doctor thought, they thought this kid could have possibly an avulsion fracture. Well, a couple days ago, he emails me again and he says, Ryan, I got even worse news. The doctor is suggesting Tommy John for this 10-year-old. And so, I mean, that's very unusual for a young kid to have Tommy John. And the Tommy John surgeries generally only last like 3.5 years. The older you have them, the more they last. Generally in Major League Baseball, if you're having them over the age of 28, you got a lot of, medical attention, and it's just, you get significantly more strength to protect that region. So now I'm kind of getting all my surgeon friends who are in Major League Baseball to review this case because it's pretty frightening, I think, for this kid's career long term. If he has a revision surgery, let's just say, his opportunities go further down. That's why we want to prevent the first one. Now we're in the world of trying to prevent the second one, which is a problem. So a long story short, there's a ton of stress coming to this family. This young 10-year-old is, I can't even believe how devastated to be at 10 years old to say, I'm going to need surgery. The frightening part even is this little body going under anesthetic, under the knife, and who knows how long the road to recovery is for a body that young, who doesn't have great residual strength. And, you got a lot of growth happening. The ligament crosses two bones, and those bones are going to grow apart. And if it's a surgically repaired ligament, there's a risk that it could be overstretched, all sorts of complications. And the research that we're reading now is that Tommy John surgery in a youth athlete, is a no-go. So, consolidating all the information and getting it back to the parent, is good. But this could have been prevented if they were testing and they realized, the kid was deficient in strength, and they make a decision to say, well, we can't have him pitch right now. It's too much frequent overuse. We need to focus that time to strengthen his arm to prevent this catastrophe, Yeah.
All right. So let's kind of dive deeper into this topic of what exactly is this thing on injury prevention, because I think there's a huge misconception, and that's part of the reason why it is so overlooked and not regarded as being very sexy. Because I think a lot of people, they view what we're doing is taking these exercises that were done clinically as part of a rehab process and then moving them into an athlete's training program. So we're basically doing the rehab on the early end. They're like, oh yeah, I'm just doing my rehab stuff before I get hurt. And that's not what it is. And this topic of injury prevention really is that training needs to look more like training and less like rehab. And I think the best analogy for it is, our body's capacity. Think of it as a bucket. And we only have so much room in this bucket that we can load, whatever we're doing as part of our sports performance training and our strength training, and even stuff that just fills up our lives in regards to, especially a very young kid playing multiple sports or just horsing around with his friends. You only have so much you can fill in this bucket. And this idea of injury prevention for me is, how do we build this bigger bucket? How do we expand the bucket so we can actually load more stuff into it before the bucket breaks completely? And so really, I think what we're doing with injury prevention is we're just getting more intelligent with the strength training and development process of actually getting more specific on the demands for a sport and making sure that we are covering up the basis for what this athlete needs to perform well, or to perform at a higher level. So let's focus on this specifically for baseball. What do we need to do to build a bigger bucket for a baseball player So when they get out into the field or when they're pushing their velocity as part of a more intense velocity program, they can stay safe rather than ending up injured or hurt.
You want to take that, Jordan?
Yeah, so for me, it starts at a young age to where just any type of training is going to be a benefit. When I was working for the NPA, we always called it functional fitness. And we would take the same little 9, 10-year-olds and we'd start getting them functionally fit with body weight exercises, tons of isometrics to prep them so that way as they get older, they can handle that more robust training. So you have to set a very wide foundation so you can build on top of it. You can't just go like, hey, you know what, my kid, and you can add these things into, and I'm starting to run a lot more youth camps and different things like that for these younger athletes because I see a need for this. And we're making the activation and the warm up very dynamic. And I know that's a word everybody uses, but we're doing tons of isometrics in there. It's like 10 minutes long, but we're building that strength and the stability in the joints and everything they're going to need, which is then going to layer in when they want to start doing arm care. That now starts adding in those different resistances and bands that grows with you, and you're building on top of that foundation. Hopefully that makes sense, but I think it starts at a younger age to where you just have to start getting those athletes primed and ready to go for a little bit more intensity, and they like it more too. So just fitness in general.
Yeah, I'm like, for me, I agree because you have to develop capacity. One of the things I think that's super important is to evaluate the warm-up routine as a prevention. You know, people always think about, I'm focused on training and I'm focused on what happens between the white lines during games. But that intermediate between the training, the things you do off the field, and then all of a sudden competition, it comes from, you know, an in-between being your preparation. You know, people, you watch warm-ups. So a lot of the time, you know, I had staff with the Angels. They were amazing because I would tell them the most important thing that we can do with our athletes is the warm-up dynamic activation process. You know, we got rid of the name warm-up. We got rid of the name dynamic warm-up. We called it activation because it needs to have a progression. And that's something that we have integrated into our strength course that's going to be coming out with our Bulletproof Arm series. It's called the 4S. Squeezing muscles, skipping, starts or sprint actions in the warm-up, and then we have like stretching, but these are more dynamic and multifunctional dynamic stretching. So, you know, the key is having a thorough process prior to competition that prepares the athlete. I mean, I was amazed. I have advised one national team. I'm going to be doing a few others, and you watch kids from various regions in the country, and they all have very different approaches to getting activated. Some just grab a ball and go to the line. If you left them on their own, they're doing very little to potentiate their muscles, to get them activated, for them to get used to having a higher amount of force. And if you don't produce a higher amount of force, you're going to have to use a lot of the elasticity of passive tissues, your capsules, your tendons, your ligaments, trying to get everything you can out of them where the muscle function isn't there. You know, so for people looking for the injury protection piece, like really take the time, you know, especially I get a lot of injured clients. The first thing we do, we evaluate the warm-up. I can't stress it enough. You know, you can use the post exam after the warm-up first to make sure that, you know, going into any event that's high intensity, they're not fatigued, and it can get masked. This is something I've seen. And I think when the athlete goes through the warm-up and you see fatigue and you're like, wow, that needs to be fixed. Sometimes if you do the post exam again, okay, if you use the strength tester and you check it, the strength actually increases. So they get potentiated during throwing. However, you got to be careful because a lot of those injuries could happen in the early parts of the game. Okay. Where now it takes a little bit to get their muscles amped up again. Right. So it's like this, it's this ramping. So for me, it's, you know, take the time, be scientific about the warm up. Just throwing weighted balls into a wall, and an athlete. I'm making an example, is weak in IR, and they put a heavy ball in their hand, and the IR muscles are what's needed to slow that heavy ball down. Right? They get overworked, and all of a sudden you see during the warm up afterwards, you're like, holy heck, you've lost a ton of strength post. In your internal rotation muscles. Well, now we expose the elbow to problems, and we also sacrifice velocity because in sustaining it, because they just don't have enough internal rotation strength. So I can't stress enough to people, focus on the warm up before you're worrying about everything else.
Okay. So we get guys moving before they hit that higher intensity stuff. And I want to hit on Blair's question here. Because I think, Ryan, your points are very specific towards probably an older demographic of high school, college, pro players that are really, really hitting high intensities.
Mm-hmm.
They need a pretty gradual build to get up to that point. Blair's asking about, what about our younger kids, like 12, 13 years old? I know for me as a coach for multiple different sports, at younger ages, I'm typically looking at more general athletic patterns of doing a dynamic warm up prior to a practice where, they're doing animal walks, and then we start working on some high knees and butt kicks and karaoke's. But anything else more specific for a younger baseball player that we can build into a warm up routine? What do you guys think about that?
Do you want to take this first one, Jordan?
Yeah. So what I've noticed is the younger kids are probably more prone to learning advanced movements than older people because they're blank slates, and they actually learn really quick. And, then this age range at 12, 13-year-old, I've started taking on a lot more guys on that individual side, just because they've been reaching out. And what I've noticed is they learn a lot faster than even my minor league guys and my college guys and my high school guys, because they have less bad habits, or they have less. Like, one thing you'll always notice is people will come with a reason as to why something won't work. And I had a whole youth coaching clinic that I put on for a couple, about 4 or 5 different little youth leagues that are in my area. And they go, well, my kids aren't ready for this yet. They're not ready for this. I go, well, how do you know? Have you tried it? Well, no, I haven't tried it, but they're just not ready. So then, it's been about a month and a half since I did this clinic. And now I've had about 9 coaches reach out and go, hey, you were right. My kids can handle a lot more than I thought they could. And then next thing you know, they're sending me videos of their kids hitting doubles and throwing accurately and catching the ball and doing all these things that they insisted they couldn't. And everyone comes in with this mindset that, well, they're young, so we have to dial it back. Find out what they can't do and then work backwards from there. Don't find out what they can and try to build on. Figure out what they can't do really quickly, challenge them, and work backwards. That's the way I've noticed for young players really works out well. We oftentimes think that they're just not capable. Now, I'm not saying, grab the Olympic bar and start having them do, what's that called? The snatch or whatever. Sure. I'm not saying do that. I'm talking about our warm-up routine. Give them a little heavier resistance bands. Give them a little bit more eccentric training. Give them a little bit more sprint work. Give them change of direction. I love the word curvilinear just because it sounds cool. But you start doing that type of running and weird figure 8 patterns and fun stuff with these players, and all of a sudden those 9-year-olds are going, oh, this is really cool. And then they start gaining athleticism really quick. So they're just blank slates that are ready to go.
I would agree, Jordan. I think more than going out there and having fun, and I'm not saying sports shouldn't be fun. Kids want to emulate their.
They're not fun. We're here to win, Matt.
We're here to win, exactly. But yeah, kids want to emulate their heroes, and when they see their favorite player and how they warm up and their process to getting ready, I think they want to emulate that on the field, just as much as they want to go out there and have fun with their friends. They want to be elite athletes. I think that's something they aspire to. So I would agree, Jordan. We don't have to baby them just because they're kids. We could give them some higher level stuff and challenge them in different ways.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit. One of the things, time-wise, there's a question here. Time-wise, it's important to know that it takes about 2.5 minutes to raise the core temperatures of continuous exercise, right? A continuous movement. I've done some things that take like 6 minutes. I got shotgun warm-ups for relievers that get your body ready, right? Then there's something that's more extended that's 12 minutes. And then I have one that's 20 minutes that I use at different periods of time. In the off season, it's our aerobic work really to get the athlete prepared. And you kind of find your way with the athletes in terms of their capacity. With a 12, 13-year-old kid, 6 to 8 minutes is great, but you always want to do something a little bit different. You don't want to have your activation monotonous. One of the things that we had with the Angels is it said every single day that they're on the field and we do the activation, there's got to be a couple things that are different, one or two even, because if you don't, the athlete goes on autopilot. They stop staying focused. And then at the end, I always do some kind of functional element. Like, for example, I ran a clinic at Jordan's high school, and afterwards, small mini outfield plays. You could have two lines and they could run wide out patterns, with, V cuts and things like that, where you have a ball. I do a lot of the warm-ups with the glove on because most of the time we're running with the glove on. So getting them, a reward of something fun, it also gets them encouraged to want to do a good warm-up because now you're doing something short distance, maybe like a 5-5 cut, or they're doing flips over the head and they're running, whatever it may be. It gets them really excited and you can gamify it. Who's going to make the most catches and give them 3 or 4 each. You get them really amped up and ready. That makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable,
Mm-hmm. All right. So this has been great in regards to the preparation process to performance. That is one way we can reduce the risk of injuries when we get into the higher level stuff. But let's start focusing actually into the training aspect. Specifically in my background, I know there's been a ton of research around soccer players, basketball players, multi-directional athletes, and reducing the risk of ACL injuries. And one of the major things is plyometrics and how that reduces the risk of an ACL injury as part of performance competition. But what about for the throwing athlete? What does the evidence point at as the greatest predictor of injury? And what can we do about that?
Hey, Matt, real quick on that. It looked like Blair just had to if anyone's got questions in general, just email me. It's just jordan@armcare.com. My name's right there on the screen, Jordan, and then @armcare.com. That's how you're going to be able to get a hold of me. And then Blair also mentioned the 6 courses that we're running that deal on right now. Those courses are going to go way more in depth on what we're going over right now. Before we forget to mention that, thanks for the reminder, Blair. But where can they find those courses, Matt? I don't know exactly where to go on the website.
Yeah, I'll drop a link to the course bundle here in the chat. And Jordan, I think it's also a good time to plug your onboarding sessions that you're doing.
So anybody who's new, also, you're going to be getting an email, and you guys can sign up for onboarding, where we're going to go a little more in depth on use of the app, what you're going to need, different things like that. They're little 30-minute chunks. You guys should get those in your email. Just sign up on those. And we'll find a time to kind of answer those questions. So thank you for the reminder without meaning to, Blair. That was because we forgot to go over some of that stuff. What was your question, Matt? What were we going to talk about?
Well, I want to get some of the evidence on what does the research show is a predictor for injury, and then what can we do about those risks as part of our training?
This is 100% up Ryan's alley right here. He's got his propeller hat on and everything.
I'm underhanding it to him. Knock it out of the park.
I gotta cut out the question again.
The research around injuries in baseball, and what are the greatest predictors that are going to point to a baseball player getting hurt, and then what can we do about that?
Yeah. So in the research, it's interesting at different levels. I don't know if it reflects what happens in pro baseball, but most injuries are happening in practice. They're not happening in games. And one of the things is that you you're not quantifying things the same way in practice. You know, games, there's pitch counts, there's all sorts of things that you're paying attention to. Setting up a really good plan. You know, if you don't plan, you know, your plan is important, because if you don't, you're planning to fail. But the plan has to be dynamic. That's why we have our sensors, so that we can modify things. Athlete's arm strong, give it more. Athlete's arm is kind of staying where it is, keep the same. Athlete's arm is, you know, weakened or fatigued or not recovered, we drop down the demands. To prevent injuries, we really have to be able to be, you know, dynamic. The other thing that's really important, we have to have a whole set of operations for players that have had injury. So the greatest predictor of injury is previous injury. Gets worse, you know, if we don't take care of the micro damage, the tendonitis, the kid saying, okay, 1 every 3 throws, I feel great, I want to pitch, but my arm kills in between. You know, these are things that are precursors to bad stuff. And the other thing too is that, you know, a lot of the issues that I think that are caused by injury are coming from just overuse pitching, you know, not throwing strikes. You know, I think at times when athletes are doing bullpens, they should be throwing strikes to their own team. Like, focus on throwing strikes. You know, I know I grew up in Canada. We had one of our levels that you pitch to your own team, and the kid has to learn how to throw strikes. And it comes from, you know, even in catch play, hitting your target. Because if pitching injuries are really caused by pitching, if we can manage not overthrowing, having more walks, having, you know, throwing less of those overuse units, that's also really important. You know, another thing people don't think about, and this happens in the major league level, and I'm sure it happens at higher levels, college probably, if your catcher is not very proficient at framing low strikes, you can really mess up a pitcher. Your defense is bad, right? All of a sudden you got more runners on base because your shortstop can't make plays. You know, now the pressure goes up. So there's a lot of factors that are, you know, not just in the pitcher, but around, you know, to prevent these injuries from happening.
Mm-hmm. You're muted, Matt. You're muted.
Thank you. I want y'all to hear my heavy breathing. So Ryan talks about science. What about in regards to strength training? I know a lot of the research that was foundational for the development of arm care looked at these MLB studies that found preseason weakness, specifically around the posterior shoulder, was linked to higher risk of injury as players got into their season. Additionally, preseason weakness was a big risk factor because we see a lot of players getting hurt at the start of the season. Can you expound on that research at all?
Yeah.
No, I mean, Matt, that can't be right. Everyone in the comment section says you just change the stride angle and they're fixed, you know?
I know, man. It's all mechanics, right?
The training's huge. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a multi-sport athlete. You know, a lot of parents are like, well, my kid plays basketball, they play, you know, hockey, they play baseball. There's no time for training. You know, they say that. And the multi-sport athlete needs the training the most. All these different physical stressors that happen all before baseball. Like the issue I have is that sometimes we could be putting ourselves in a bad place when it comes to just the throwing arm, is that athletes don't focus on their arm care year round. They wait until, you know, it's now February, the season starts in March 15th, because it's baseball time at the high school, right? And that's an issue, is that, you know, these athletes, their strength training, you know, and their throwing workouts are very acute. You know, doing the little things each day, making a little bit of progress, you know, is important. And, you know, the thing is, you don't have to go to a weight room to train, and it doesn't have to be super long. You know, If you can commit to 20 minutes, if you're, a 12 or 13-year-old, 20 minutes twice a week of strength training, you're working on single leg strength, single arm strength. We're not talking about getting under a bar or bench pressing or squatting 450 or deadlifting, 570 pounds off the floor. We're talking about using manageable weights, and even if they're at practice, we have the bands, we have all sorts of things to get some strength in, and if you're an older player that's on a high performance program, these have to be mapped out for the entire year. Especially, you can't just say, forget it, I'm not going to do anything with my arm, all the little muscles. I'm playing basketball. What do I need that for? I mean, high school, I played basketball, volleyball, and baseball. In college, I played volleyball and baseball. There was training all year round, and I actually threw all year round. I didn't have arm pain. I never felt weak. And I thought to myself, why am I going to detrain for 4 months, not touch a ball, and then all of a sudden, bam, I got to go, right? And once you commit to, generally kids commit to baseball around 16 or 17. The multi-sport guys, they want to be drafted, they want to get a scholarship, and you got to click on, because once, preseason hits, that's when the injury risks go up, right? All that research shows that there's this huge spike, and then at least in pro ball, it starts coming down and down and down, and then all of a sudden there's a draft, and now you get another spike again because you got all these kids, that are not playing. Some of my clients, they've been advised by their agents to say, you're not picking up a ball this summer, and if you do, you're just throwing bullpens. So they just don't have. Now the fall comes, right? So they just don't have the capacity, and that's scary.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start wrapping this up. I think it's been a great conversation. Let's summarize where we're at right now. For starters, most players don't want to do these basic rehab exercises, and they don't need to. Okay. Training should look more like training, less like rehab. And the beauty of that is by expanding players' capacity, they improve their performance as well. Okay. So if you are truly creating a training program that's going to prevent injuries, it's also going to help them enhance their performance as well. So if your arm care looks like basic arm rotation exercises at 0 degrees, then honestly, you're not doing a great job of reducing the risk of injury, but then you're also not enhancing performance very well either. So that'd be my first suggestion. Is it's going to be more entertaining, it's going to be more compelling to a player if it is more advanced and pushes capacity a bit harder. Okay, so think of it as performance training, but it's a bit more specific around the performance demands for baseball. Okay, we talked quite a bit about the need for a good warm up. Okay, if players are not getting sweaty, if players are not activating their muscles before they throw, okay, they're missing out on critical points in what can they do to not only enhance performance, but get their body ready to perform at a higher level. And the last thing I'll say is I think the dose makes the poison is a great way to sum up how do we view training, and that if we just overload an athlete with a huge volume of throwing, and Ryan brought up the point on a player took 4 months off and now it's time to get back to throwing, and we just throw him back out there to his regular workloads. Okay, that's a huge dosage for that player at that time, not accustomed to that amount of throwing. Okay, so it's making the poison. But with the smaller dosage built up over time, the body is going to adapt and improve the capacity to sustain that. So keep that in mind as you develop training programs. The dose makes the poison, and we want to help the body get accustomed to and be ready for those bigger doses. Guys, anything else to wrap it up?
I mean,
that's it.
Just for me, be data-led, be specific. We got the technology now. Like generalization equals hospitalization. Doing the same thing with one guy is going to be poisonous for another, using kind of Matt's, analogy. But the individualization equals optimization. You're doing what you need to do for the throwing arm. Listen to the throwing arm, understand the throwing arm, get those metrics, and modify. Know when to hit the gas, know when to take your foot off the gas, know when to hit the brake. And there's going to be way more success as far as the injury epidemiology in this game. I'm 100% certain on that.
Oh yeah. All right, guys. Great conversation. We'll see you next time. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome.